They say you should never let your career become your identity. It's good advice, I'm sure. But when you're a single mother, raising a daughter alone after losing your husband, that advice feels like a luxury you can't afford. My career wasn't just my identity, it was our lifeline. My name is Olivia Hayes. I'm 39 years old, and I have a PhD in computational linguistics. Until last week, I was the lead data scientist and AI strategy consultant at Axiom Dynamics, one of the most aggressive tech consulting firms in Denver. I was the one who designed the core predictive algorithm for the Sterling Innovations project. That algorithm didn't just land Axiom Dynamics a $20 million contract. It was the key to the single biggest deal in the company's entire history. My work, my code, my breakthrough. But of course, that's not what my digital personnel file will say anymore. It has probably already been scrubbed clean. The weekly team sync had just ended. One by one, the faces of my colleagues vanished from the screen, leaving just the two of us. Marcus Vance, a partner and the head of our division, stared at me from my monitor. His virtual background was a sleek, minimalist office overlooking a pristine city skyline, a stark contrast to the laundry basket sitting just out of my camera's view. He gave a polished, almost rehearsed smile. "Olivia, we're making some changes to align with the new strategic direction," he began, his tone as smooth as glass. "And unfortunately, your role is being eliminated." A sterile, corporate phrase for "you're fired." He didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. "This is just how the business world works," he said, with a casual, dismissive wave of his hand. "Try not to take it personally." He called it a realignment. I called it what it was, a calculated betrayal. The moment felt utterly surreal, flattened by the pixelated coldness of the video call. There was no stale coffee, no humming air conditioner. Just the low, electronic whine of my laptop and the image of his perfectly composed face. I stared at his digital avatar, my own reflection a faint ghost on the screen. My ears filled with a roaring static, drowning out the sound of his voice. 5 years. 5 years I had poured into Axiom Dynamics since re-entering the workforce after my husband's death. 5 years of building their most sophisticated AI models from the ground up. All those late nights, debugging code while my daughter, Chloe, slept. All the missed school events and scraped-together holidays. All for this. To be discarded over a video call, my access to everything I'd built about to be severed with a single click. "Effective immediately," he added, as if I were a faulty piece of hardware being unplugged. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said with a slight shrug, his expression utterly devoid of genuine regret. "But we need a different approach, a new energy for the team. You understand how these things go." No, I didn't. Not like this. Not after everything I had given to this company, to him. I forced myself to take a silent, steadying breath, lifting my chin just a little higher. My hands were trembling under the desk, but I would not let him see it. I refused to give him the satisfaction. "Thank you for the opportunity, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I reached for the mouse to end the call myself. He looked genuinely surprised by my composure. I imagine he was prepared for tears, for an outburst of anger, perhaps even for pleading. But when you've already had to rebuild your life from the ashes once before, you learn how to walk away with your head held high. Even when your entire world feels like it's imploding. I didn't bother asking why my name had been conspicuously absent from the final presentation deck. I didn't need to ask. 2 weeks earlier, I had finalized the Sterling proposal, the most complex and high-stakes AI model we had ever developed. I had dedicated 3 relentless months to it, architecting the model, cleaning the data, and designing the predictive algorithms to align with their aggressive growth forecasts. It had demanded every bit of my expertise, every ounce of my skill. The day before the final pitch, I saw the version he was presenting. My name, my contributions, had been completely erased. "Don't worry about it, Olivia," he'd said with a dismissive little wave when I'd questioned him. "This is just how we package things for the client. You'll get the credit internally, where it counts." I let it go. I shouldn't have. Now, as the video call ended with a final, indifferent click from his end, a notification popped up on my screen. "Your access has been revoked." My email, the company's internal servers, our shared drives, everything was gone. I was locked out before I could even process what had happened. I sat at my small desk in the corner of my living room for nearly an hour, my hands gripping the edge of the worn wood. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't just anger that I felt, it was a profound sense of being hollowed out. Not just because I'd been fired, though the sting of that was sharp and deep. It was because I had let him use me. Because I had seen the warning signs, analyzed the data, and still, I'd given him the full measure of my talent and my loyalty. As I stared out the window at the cold, gray Denver sky, my thoughts turned immediately to Chloe. I thought about our rent. I thought about her school tuition. I thought about the braces we'd just agreed she needed. My mind replayed the endless loop of the last few months, working until 1 in the morning, waking up to find my laptop still warm beside me. The quiet guilt of another dinner Chloe had to eat alone while I told her I had to finish. Just one more thing. I remembered a conversation from a few months back, during a performance review. "You lack that killer instinct, Olivia," Marcus had told me, leaning back in his chair with a patronizing air. "That's what's holding you back from a real leadership role." He was so incredibly wrong. That night, with the city lights beginning to sparkle against the encroaching darkness, I opened my personal laptop. I logged into my private GitHub repository. I hadn't been consciously strategic about it. It was just a reflex born of my academic background and a deep-seated belief in intellectual property. I always back up my work. I had saved every commit, every line of code, every note for the Sterling algorithm. The entire project history was there, a perfect, time-stamped record of my creation. What I didn't know at that moment, and what Marcus certainly had no idea about, was that the CEO of Sterling Innovations, Evelyn Reed, was a former professional acquaintance. We had worked together years ago, when she was just getting her first major startup off the ground. She'd said something to me once that had stuck with me. "If you ever want a real opportunity to build something, call me. The people who create things deserve to be rewarded, not just the people who sell them." I had never made that call, feeling secure in my own path. But maybe now was the time. Her name sat at the top of my LinkedIn contacts, a silent, almost forgotten promise. I clicked the message button. The subject line I chose was direct and unflinching, "The true architect of the Sterling algorithm." My fingers trembled slightly as I typed. "Evelyn, I hope this message finds you well. You may not remember me, but our paths crossed when I consulted on your Series B funding model years ago. I'm writing to you because I have just left Axiom Dynamics. And there is critical information you need to know about the Sterling Innovations proposal you recently received." My cursor blinked over the send button. I didn't fully grasp it then, but that single message was about to trigger a cascade of events that would shake the very foundations of the company that thought it could simply delete me. And by the end of the week, I would find myself in a position of power I had never imagined, sitting across the virtual table from Marcus. Not as his subordinate, but as his client. When I finally clicked send, my hands were shaking. But it wasn't from fear. It was a surge of pure adrenaline. It was the feeling that comes from finally pushing back after being pushed down for far too long. I had no idea if Evelyn would even see the message, let alone believe me. But it didn't matter. At least I had used my voice. At least I had refused to disappear into the silence they had assigned me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the shadows on my ceiling. The silence in our small apartment was only broken by the soft, rhythmic sound of Chloe breathing in the room next door. I found her asleep on the couch earlier, a book resting on her chest, having waited up for me to emerge from my home office. I hadn't told her what happened. I couldn't bring myself to let the fear I felt seep into her world. Not yet. Not until I knew what the next move was. At 7:02 the next morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A LinkedIn notification. It was from Evelyn Reed. "Olivia, of course I remember you. The predictive growth model you built for us back then is still the foundation of our long-term forecasting. Thank you for reaching out to me directly. I have some questions about what you sent, and I may have an opportunity one think you'll be very interested in hearing about. Let's talk." It was Evelyn. My heart leaped. I sat bolt upright in bed, nearly knocking over my glass of water. Evelyn Reed wasn't just the CEO of Sterling Innovations anymore. She was a titan in the tech industry, a visionary known for her sharp intellect, her unwavering ethics, and her refusal to suffer fools. If she wanted to talk, this was far more than a simple courtesy. I scheduled a video call with her for that afternoon. Her executive assistant put me through without a moment's delay. Olivia, Evelyn said, her voice a calm, commanding presence on the call. I've reviewed the code samples and commit logs you sent me. There was a brief, loaded pause, and I instinctively braced myself for what might come next. And to be frank, she continued, her voice hardening with an edge of steel, I'm livid. I felt you deserved to know that the algorithm wasn't created by the person who presented it, I said, my voice shaking just a little despite my best efforts to keep it steady. That was my work. Of course it was, she replied without hesitation. I knew it the second I saw the logic structure. It has your signature all over it, Olivia. Clean, elegant, and 5 steps ahead of everyone else. She then began to ask questions not of suspicion, but of genuine curiosity. They were sharp, insightful, and deeply technical, drilling down into the data modeling, the risk mitigation parameters, and the very architecture of the learning algorithm. I answered every one of them with ease. Not because I had prepared, but because it was mine. Every line of code, every decision, every single piece of it was mine. Olivia, she said after a long, thoughtful silence, I am terminating our contract with Axiom Dynamics. The decision is effective immediately. My heart felt like it stopped for a full second. Are you sure? I whispered. I am absolutely certain. I do not do business with frauds, she stated, her words leaving no room for argument. And I refuse to reward intellectual property theft. However, she continued, her tone shifting slightly, I also don't believe in letting brilliant work go to waste. We still need that strategy, and we need it implemented. I've been planning to launch a new, specialized consulting venture focused on AI ethics and implementation. I want you to come in, not just as an employee, but as a co-founder and chief technology officer. The role is yours, Olivia. If you want it. I just blinked at my screen, the words failing to form in my throat. You always had a brilliant mind for building things, Olivia, she said gently. You just needed a place where you were allowed to lead. I can give you that space. But I need an answer soon. I want to move on this, and I want to move fast. I was quiet for a long moment, the scale of her offer slowly sinking in. I need to think about it, I said finally, even though my heart was screaming a different answer. I understand, she said, her voice kind. But don't take too long. You deserve to be the author of your own story, not a footnote in someone else's. We ended the call, and I just sat there, the phone still clutched in my hand, my screen gone dark. Me, a CTO? A co-founder? I thought about the years of work, the overlooked contributions, the endless, patronizing feedback. I thought about the phrase that had been echoing in my mind since yesterday. This is just how the business world works. And in a way, Marcus had been right. The world did work like that. Until someone, somewhere, found the courage to decide that it wouldn't. Not anymore. That evening, I finally told Chloe everything. She sat on my bed, curled up in her favorite oversized hoodie, her expression serious as she listened. He fired you? She asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. But Mom, you work harder than anyone at that company. I know, sweetie, I said, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. But it's going to be okay. In fact, something much better might be about to happen. She looked at me with an intensity that only a 13-year-old who has had to grow up a little too fast can possess. Are you scared? She asked. Yes, I admitted, my voice thick with honesty. I'm terrified, but I'm also ready. The next morning, I called Evelyn. I'm in. A broad smile spread across her face on the video screen. Good, she said. Welcome aboard, partner. Your new company is called Athena Strategies. I've already started the paperwork. 2 hours later, the first news alert hit the industry blogs. The headline was blunt, Sterling Innovations terminates landmark contract with Axiom Dynamics, citing leadership and integrity concerns. The article mentioned that inside sources confirmed Axiom was completely blindsided by the move. I allowed myself a small, tight smile as I imagined the look on Marcus's face when he saw that headline pop up on his screen. But I knew that was only the beginning. The next day, as expected, his executive assistant sent a desperate email to Sterling, trying to set up an emergency call to salvage the partnership. Evelyn forwarded it directly to me with a very short note. He's asking to speak with the lead on our new AI venture. That would be you, CTO. Your move. And so, the next morning, when the video call was finally connected and his panicked, flustered voice came through my speakers, I took one last deep breath. I straightened my posture in my desk chair, and I spoke the words I had been waiting a lifetime to say. This is Olivia Hayes. You're speaking with the CTO of Athena Strategies. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound it was almost a physical force. For a few seconds, the only sound I could hear was his sharp, shallow breathing. Olivia, he finally stammered, his carefully constructed composure completely gone. I wasn't expecting you. I imagine you weren't, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. You were trying to reach the technology lead for Sterling's new project. That's me now. He let out a weak, sputtering laugh, the kind of sound a person makes when they're desperately trying to claw back control of a situation that has already slipped from their grasp. Look, Olivia, this is obviously just some kind of big misunderstanding, he said, his voice shifting into a placating tone. I had no idea there was some kind of issue between you and Axiom. If I had known you were still involved in this capacity, I would have handled things very differently, of course. I let his words hang in the digital air between us, the sheer audacity of them taking my breath away. You didn't know? I repeated slowly, letting each word land with precision. You didn't know there was an issue when you removed my name from every single commit on the Sterling project's final code? When you presented my work, my algorithm, as your own? And then you fired me 2 days after the deal was signed? But you didn't know? His voice hardened, shifting from false friendliness to open defense. I was under immense pressure from the board, he snapped. They wanted cuts. I had to make difficult leadership decisions. You know how this business works, Olivia. And frankly, while you're a brilliant data analyst, you were never leadership material. That jab stung more than I wanted to admit. Not because I believed it, but because it was the same tired excuse I had been fed for years. I was too technical, too focused, too quiet. Always too much of something, and somehow never enough of the right thing. You've made a terrible mistake, he continued, his voice rising. And I don't just mean leaving the firm. You are burning bridges you can't afford to lose. You need to think about your future. You need to think about your daughter. And that was it. That was the moment the last shred of my composure cracked, replaced by a cold, hard fury. He had just tried to use my daughter, my Chloe, as a weapon against me. You do not get to bring my daughter into this conversation, I said, my voice dropping, each word laced with ice. Ever. And for the record, I'm not burning bridges. I'm building my own. There was another long, heavy pause, followed by a frustrated sigh from his end. You know, he said, his voice laced with a strange kind of disappointment, you used to be different, Olivia. You used to be so grateful. That word, that single, condescending word, grateful. He said it as if every opportunity, every bit of success I had earned with my own mind and my own work, was a gift he had bestowed upon me. I was never grateful for being undervalued and exploited, I said, my voice steady and clear. I was committed. I was loyal. But that loyalty died the moment you decided my contributions were disposable. I am not the one who should be worried about their future, Marcus. You are. I ended the call. That same afternoon, Evelyn and I met at her downtown Denver office. It was a space filled with light, modern art, and a quiet, focused energy that felt a world away from the cutthroat culture at Axiom. People moved with a sense of purpose and collaboration. It felt alive. You handled that perfectly, she said, after I recounted the conversation with Marcus. But you need to brace yourself. Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully. She was right. By Thursday, the whispers had started. First on LinkedIn, in carefully worded posts from Axiom employees, then in the private Slack channels I still had access to through former colleagues. Marcus was already spinning his own narrative. That I had left the firm voluntarily. That I had been underperforming for months. That I was bitter, unstable, and had become difficult to manage. It was such a tired, predictable playbook. I spent the rest of the day methodically going through my personal archives, emails, project logs, and every single performance review I had ever received. For 5 years, I had documented everything, not because I ever expected to need it for a fight like this, but because I am a data scientist. I believe in keeping the receipts. That night, a Slack DM came in from Hannah, a former colleague from my team. Olivia, I don't know if you've seen the garbage Marcus is spreading, but I need you to know that I have your back. We all know you were the brains behind that project. If you need someone to testify to that, I'm in. She wasn't the only one. Over the next 48 hours, my phone lit up with messages. More than a dozen former and current coworkers reached out, each one sharing a story that echoed my own. Credit stolen. Promotions inexplicably denied. Ideas dismissed in meetings only to be presented by Marcus a week later as his own. So many of them had been too afraid to speak up, trapped by fear or financial necessity. They were still there, quietly trying to survive. You were the first one to actually get out, Hannah told me in a follow-up message. But now that you have, some of us are ready to follow you out the door. By the end of the week, I had more than just moral support. I had a digital folder filled with evidence. Screenshots of Slack conversations, forwarded emails, internal memos, all pieces of a dark puzzle that painted a damning picture of years of manipulation, mismanagement, and deeply unethical behavior. But the most beautiful part? I didn't even need to use it, because the board of directors at Axiom Dynamics was already getting very nervous. On Monday morning, a new notice appeared on their investor relations page. The Sterling Innovations contract, their flagship win, had been officially terminated. Their quarterly revenue projections were being revised significantly downward. By midday, their stock had plummeted by 6%. And then, I received an encrypted email that I never would have anticipated. Olivia, this is highly confidential, but you should know the board has launched a formal investigation into leadership conduct. Several senior partners have voiced concerns over the handling of key accounts, with Sterling being the final straw. There is serious talk of a leadership transition. You didn't just walk away from a job, you pulled the thread that's unraveling something we have all been ignoring for far too long. The message was simply signed anonymous. I read it 3 times, my hands resting on my keyboard. They were perfectly steady now. Marcus had told me I'd made a mistake, but it was becoming clearer by the hour that the only mistake I had ever made was staying silent for as long as I did. By the following week, the industry whispers had erupted into full-blown headlines. Tech consulting giant loses flagship client amidst leadership controversy. Axiom Dynamics in crisis mode following executive shakeup. I watched from my home office as the updates flooded my newsfeed, my phone buzzing every few minutes with a new message or a link to another article. Each notification felt like a small, quiet moment of vindication. It wasn't about a desire for revenge. It was the profound relief of seeing the truth finally, forcefully, break through to the surface, the very same truth they had tried so desperately to bury me under. At Athena Strategies, things were moving at lightning speed. Evelyn and I were building our team, handpicking brilliant, ethical people. Some of them were former Axiom employees who had resigned shortly after I did. Others came from Evelyn's extensive network. But every single person we hired shared our core motivation: to build a company founded on honesty, transparency, and excellence. For the first time in my professional life, I wasn't just executing someone else's vision. I was co-authoring the blueprint. Still, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that this wasn't over. Marcus wasn't the kind of man who would accept defeat. Not quietly. Not ever. That Friday, my lawyer, Isabel Rossi, called me. "You are not going to like this, Olivia," she said, her voice flat and all business. "Go on," I replied, bracing myself for the impact. "Axiom Dynamics has filed a cease and desist order against you. They are claiming you used proprietary information and trade secrets from your time there to launch a competing business and poach their client." I let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't because I found it funny, but because the sheer, predictable audacity of it was almost comical. "You mean the client whose predictive algorithm I personally wrote, whose entire AI strategy one designed, and who happened to be a professional contact of mine long before I ever even heard of Axiom Dynamics?" Isabel snorted on the other end of the line. "That's the one. It's a classic scare tactic, Olivia. They're hoping you'll panic, that you'll be intimidated into settling quietly, or even better, that you'll fold completely." "Let them try," I said, a new resolve hardening in my voice. "We have the documentation for everything. But I don't want to just be reactive, Isabel. I want to be proactive. We are filing a countersuit. defamation, wrongful termination, and professional misrepresentation. And we will be submitting supporting, notarized statements from my former colleagues. Some of them are already signed and waiting. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze drifting to the Denver skyline outside my window. The whole situation felt surreal. A month ago, I was desperately trying to hold on to my job. Now, I was defending my reputation in legal filings and actively fighting to reclaim my own professional narrative. But what astonished me most wasn't the speed at which things had escalated. It was the number of people who were showing up for me. People like Samuel, a sharp junior analyst I had mentored at Axiom. He sent me a message late that night. "Olivia, I've stayed quiet for too long. I knew exactly what Marcus was doing. We all did. You were the reason our AI strategies were so successful. He just took all the credit at the presentations. I've attached a complete timeline of the project's Git commits, showing exactly where your name was stripped from the logs and replaced with his. Use it if you need it." Then came another, from Audrey, a former HR representative who had quit 6 months before I was fired. "Marcus pushed to have your performance evaluations retroactively change the quarter before you were let go. I have copies of the original files, before the alterations. You were rated exceeds all expectations before he had it changed to meets expectations. They were building a false paper trail to justify removing you." I sat with that information for a long, long time. Even knowing everything I already knew, the calculated coldness of it still managed to hurt. It wasn't because I ever believed their lies. It was the deliberate, meticulous effort they had put into crafting them. They hadn't just used me, they had tried to systematically erase me. But now, piece by piece, document by document, I was reclaiming the space they had tried to take from me. Isabel moved with incredible speed. Within days, she had filed our official response, complete with documented proof of my original work, my initial LinkedIn correspondence with Evelyn, and sworn statements from 5 former Axiom employees, all of whom were willing to testify under oath. The cease and desist order was dropped within 48 hours. There was no apology, no explanation, just a deafening silence. It was the clearest, most undeniable admission of guilt I could have possibly hoped for. The following week, Evelyn and I presented the official launch deck for Athena Strategies to a room full of potential investors. Our pitch was simple and powerful: a new kind of AI consulting firm, one rooted in unwavering integrity, built by women, and focused on developing sustainable, ethical strategies over chasing short-term profits. The energy in the room was electric. We walked out of that meeting with our first 2 major contracts secured. As I stepped into the elevator, I was hit by a tidal wave of emotions: immense pride, a touch of disbelief, and a deep, lingering undercurrent of grief for all the years I had spent waiting for someone else to give me permission to lead. I had always believed that the house would win, that the established systems were too powerful, too rigid, too protected to ever be challenged. But sometimes, the house forgets that it's the people who do the work, the people who build the foundation, who are actually holding it up. And when those people finally decide to walk away, the entire structure begins to shake. That night, I picked Chloe up from school. She came running out to the car, her face lit up with that bright, all-teeth smile that could still melt my heart. "How was your day, sweetie?" I asked as she climbed in. She buckled her seatbelt and then turned to face me, her expression serious. "My teacher asked us to write about the person who inspires us the most. I wrote about you." I glanced over at her, feeling a familiar tightening in my throat. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because you didn't let those guys stop you," she said simply. "And because now, you're the boss." I smiled, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. It wasn't just that she saw me. It was that for the first time in a very long time, I was finally seeing myself clearly, too. By the end of the month, our new company wasn't just surviving, it was making noise. Athena Strategies had officially onboarded 2 major clients, one of whom was a direct and formidable competitor of Axiom Dynamics. The irony was not lost on me. The same firm that had once told me I lacked the necessary executive polish was now forced to watch from the sidelines as I led high-stakes strategy calls with C-suite executives from Fortune 500 companies. But this was no longer about revenge. Not anymore. This was about reclaiming space and redefining what leadership could and should look like. Still, something shifted in me when the first call from a major media outlet came. The reporter was from the Tech Chronicle, and the proposed title for her story was, From Discarded to Disruptor, the woman who turned a firing into a CTO role. The reporter had done her homework. She knew about the Sterling contract, about my termination, and she even referenced internal Axiom memos that had been mysteriously leaked to the press. I'm not looking for a fight, I told her honestly during our phone interview. But I am done pretending that what happened to me was normal or acceptable. It wasn't. And I know for a fact that I am not the only one it's happened to. When the piece was published, the response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox was flooded with messages from other women in tech, from former employees of other firms, and from people I had never met. Reading your story gave me the courage to finally speak up at my own job. Your story is my story, just with different names and a different company. I have been silent for far too long. Thank you. I should have felt proud, maybe even empowered. But instead, a knot of something heavy and somber tightened in my chest. Because with every message that poured in, I was forced to confront the true, staggering scale of the damage. This was never just about me. It never had been. And now, everyone was watching, including Axiom Dynamics. 2 days after the article went live, Isabel called me. They've hired a crisis management firm, she said. A big one. They're going to try to get out ahead of this narrative. I wouldn't be surprised if they release some kind of public statement within the next day or two. Let them, I replied, a weary resolve in my voice. But it wasn't just a statement, it was a full-scale public relations campaign. They published a blog post on their corporate website with the saccharine title, Moving Forward, Learning from Our Past to Build a Stronger Future. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, filled with vague platitudes about miscommunications, necessary team transitions, and a renewed commitment to internal improvements. They never mentioned me by name, of course, but it was painfully clear that they were scrambling to control the damage I had caused. Then Marcus resurfaced. On a popular tech industry podcast, of course. I think we live in an age where people are often too quick to assign blame, he said, his voice smooth and practiced. Look, have I made mistakes as a leader? Of course, we all have. But the hard truth is, not everyone is cut out for the immense pressure of a high-stakes leadership environment. Sometimes, people can misinterpret difficult business decisions as personal attacks. It was so perfectly rehearsed, so masterfully manipulative, that I almost had to laugh. But what happened next surprised even me. That night, I received a LinkedIn message request from a name I hadn't seen in over a decade, Beatrice Thorne, the former senior partner and co-founder of Axiom Dynamics. She had retired quietly years ago, long before I had been promoted, but her name still commanded immense respect throughout the industry. Her message was short and to the point. Olivia, I have been following what is happening. I believe you. If you are open to it, I would like to meet with you. We met for coffee at a quiet corner cafe in a leafy Denver neighborhood. She looked older than I remembered from her official company photos, but she carried herself with the same unshakable, quiet authority. I stepped down from the board before Marcus was given full control of the division, she began, her gaze direct and unflinching. I saw the direction some of his decisions were heading, and I knew I wanted no part of it. But I must admit, I never anticipated that things would unravel this spectacularly, this quickly. You knew? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She gave a slow, regretful nod. I suspected. But I didn't have concrete proof, and if I'm being honest with myself, I wasn't brave enough to go digging for it. I studied her face, searching for any hint of performance or insincerity. There was none. There was only a deep, profound regret in her eyes. You weren't the only talented person he tried to erase, she continued, her voice low. You were just the first one who had the courage and the means to hold him accountable for it. She reached into her leather handbag and placed a small, encrypted flash drive on the table between us. These are internal evaluations, transcripts from board meetings, and private communications from my final 6 months at the firm. I believe you will find that they strongly support your case, should you choose to take this matter further. I picked up the drive, my heart thudding against my ribs. Why are you doing this now? I asked. Because it's long past time. The truth needs more advocates and fewer excuses, she said simply. And because you have reminded me what real leadership is supposed to look like. We sat in a shared silence for a moment, two women from two vastly different chapters of the same company's story. One walking away from a tarnished legacy, the other in the process of reclaiming her own. That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop. Beatrice Thorne had not been exaggerating. It was all there. Memos detailing the intentional manipulation of performance reviews for high-performing female employees. Transcripts of strategy meetings where Marcus openly discussed using targeted layoffs as a tool to distract from PR crises. There was even a draft of a presentation to the board titled, Proposed Restructuring, a plan to quietly replace high-risk staff in advance of IPO consideration. I hadn't been a risk because of my performance. I was a risk because I knew too much. And because I asked too many questions. The next morning, I forwarded the encrypted files to Isabel. Her response came back in just 3 minutes. Olivia, we need to take this public. This is no longer just about your story. This is systemic. This is a pattern. Are you ready for this? I stared at her message for a long time. Was I ready? No, not really. Was I prepared? Absolutely. The decision to go public was not one I made lightly. I spent the entire weekend on secure video calls with Isabel, going over everything, line by line, file by file. We painstakingly verified every document, every timeline, every name. We weren't just exposing one man's misconduct anymore. We were challenging a toxic system, and we were setting a new precedent. By Monday morning, the full story, supported by a comprehensive evidentiary file, had been submitted to the Tech Chronicle. We also prepared a formal complaint to be sent to the state's Department of Labor and the SEC, citing a clear pattern of employee misrepresentation and potentially fraudulent investor disclosures related to the firm's leadership and culture. I thought I would feel a wave of terror when it all finally went live, but I didn't. I felt calm. I felt focused. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. The article went viral within hours. Consulting giant Axiom Dynamics accused of systemic retaliation against whistleblowers. Leaked internal documents reveal a culture of deceit, from CTO to scapegoat, the collapse of Axiom's ethical framework. Former data scientist Olivia Hayes sparks an industry-wide reckoning. Suddenly, I had become the story. Not the woman who was unceremoniously fired over a video call, but the woman who had refused to be erased. My phone did not stop buzzing for 3 solid days. Journalists, former employees from a dozen other firms, women in tech from New York to San Francisco all reached out. Some of the messages called me courageous. A few others warned that I had just committed career suicide. But in my heart, I knew it was neither of those things. It was simply necessary. On Wednesday morning, Evelyn walked into my new office, holding 2 large coffees and wearing a huge, triumphant smile. You didn't just break the internet, Olivia, she said, setting one of the cups down on my desk. You shattered it. I didn't mean to, I replied with a weary sigh. That's precisely why it worked, she said, her expression softening. She sat in the chair across from me, studying my face with genuine concern. How are you doing? Really? I paused, considering the question. I'm exhausted, I said honestly. But I also feel incredibly strong. I always knew you were the one who could change things, she said softly. But even I didn't anticipate this kind of ripple effect. She was not exaggerating. Within a single week, 2 high-profile executives from Axiom Dynamics had resigned. Anonymous sources within the company confirmed to the press that the board had been aware of Marcus's misconduct for years and had actively chosen to downplay the concerns. A former HR director came forward, on the record, confirming that there had been a systematic effort to downgrade the performance reviews of employees who raised ethical questions. The firm's general counsel issued a terse statement promising a complete, top-to-bottom internal restructuring. And Marcus? He was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending the outcome of the internal investigation. His meticulously curated LinkedIn profile vanished overnight. No more self-congratulatory posts, no more spin. Just silence. I didn't gloat, not for a single second. This was never, ever about revenge. It was about recognition. It was recognition for the hundreds, maybe thousands, of employees just like me, the quiet builders, the invisible architects. The people who are the true engines of innovation, who make everything work behind the scenes. only to be dismissed as disposable when they are no longer convenient. This was about rewriting the ending of that story, for ourselves, and for each other. Chloe and I sat on the small porch of our apartment that Friday evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple over the mountains. "Mom," she said, looking up from her phone. "You're on the news again." I chuckled softly. "I know. Are you getting tired of seeing my face everywhere?" "No," she said, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I think it's cool. You didn't let them treat you like you didn't matter." I kissed the top of her head, feeling the profound weight of her words. This was never just for me. It was for her, for the kind of world I wanted her to believe was possible for herself. Later that night, I sat at my desk, looking over an email I had just received. It was an invitation from Northwood University. They wanted me to be the keynote speaker at their annual Women in Leadership Summit. The proposed title for my speech was, "How to Be the Architect of Your Own Power." I accepted the invitation without a moment's hesitation. Not because I craved the spotlight, but because I knew that someone needed to stand on that stage and say it out loud. The way things have always been is not the way they have to stay. The following month, Axiom Dynamics formally settled the case. The resolution was confidential, but it included a significant financial component, a public apology for the mismanagement of my departure, and the immediate resignation of 3 additional partners. More importantly than the money, the settlement legally required them to implement a host of new employee protections, including an independent ethics oversight board and mandatory quarterly transparency reports. It wouldn't fix the company's broken culture overnight, but it was a start. As part of the agreement, I refused to sign a non-disclosure clause. If they thought that after all of this, they could still buy my silence, they hadn't been paying attention at all. I stayed on as the CTO of Athena Strategies, helping to guide our firm into its second successful year with a growing portfolio of high-profile clients, a stellar reputation for integrity, and a long waiting list of talented people who wanted to come work with us. But more importantly, I stayed visible, because I had learned that stories like mine only have power when they are told. They serve as a reminder to others that their own negative experiences are not isolated incidents, and that silence is not the price we must pay for professional survival. They show the world that we have the right to decide how and when our own stories end. And for me, this wasn't the end at all. It was just the beginning.